we're reaching the climax of the fourth chapter of Bava Metzia, which is really the chapter of, well, we've called it overcharging or fraud or price gouging. As we get towards the end of the chapter, we've seen that the definition of gouging is restricted. So transactions in land or in slaves or in documents not included. But then we see the definition expand. We see it go in the other direction entirely. And in order to pick this up, we need another verse, another pasuk. And we need to remember that the Hebrew for price gouging is ona'ah. It's from the root vav nun he. And the verse in Mishpatim, in Exodus, says, Veger lo toneh. A stranger you shall not onesh, you shall not oppress, or you shall not gouge. Veger lo toneh velotil chatsendu. You can't oppress him or gouge him. Ki gerim heitem be'eretz Mitzrayim, because you were strangers in the land of Egypt. That's the verse. So now let's just go and see. Let's go and see what the Mishnah makes out of it, because it takes this idea of kind of overcharging or abuse or fraud in a surprising direction. Kashem she'ona'ah b'mikach u'mimkar kach ona'ah b'dvarim. Just as gouging applies to buying and selling, so it applies to words. It applies to words too. You cannot push someone around with words. And the Mishnah is going to give three examples. The first one, by the way, is related to buying and selling. And we've seen this before in the Mishnah, by the way. The Mishnah goes, if you like, step by step, link by link in a chain. It usually starts with the subject matter where it's at, and then it extends step by step. And we'll see this step by step extension. So we are going to begin. We're going to begin with commerce, or the intersection of commerce and words. Lo yomar lo b'kama chafetze. Someone shouldn't say, oh, how much does this cost? V'hu eino rotzeh likach, and he doesn't want to buy it. If you don't want to buy it, you shouldn't ask, oh, how much does it cost? You're creating hope in the mind of the seller. You shouldn't do that. Now let's go on. Because we'll leave now transactions completely and just focus on words. If someone was a Baal Tshuva, if someone has done repentance from an evil past, we shouldn't say to him, oh yeah, remember your evil deeds. Remember how you used to go out and get blind drunk when you were young. You shouldn't say that. And now going back to our verse, you shouldn't oppress a stranger. If he were descended from converts, this is not even a convert, right? This is someone descended from converts. If he was descended from converts, you shouldn't say to him, oh, remember the deeds of your ancestors. Shenemar, and here's our verse, as it is said, and a stranger you shall not wrong, and you shall not oppress. Not oppress in any way, even kind of reminding him about his ancestors. And the Gemara around these pages reinforces this in a direct way. Let's Tani Tana Kamei Rav Nachman, the Tana who taught in front of Rav Nachman Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak, the Tana who taught in front of Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak taught. Kol hamalbin pnei chavero barabim keilu shofech damim. Someone who makes the face of his friend white in public. That means who humiliates his friend in public. Someone who humiliates someone in public, ke'ilu shofech damim, is like someone who's guilty of bloodshed. Humiliation is like murder. It's much worse, in other words. It's much worse than a mere monetary offense, because with money, you can pay and get out. This is like murder if you use words to humiliate someone in public. And by the way, the famous story of the Avnei Machnai, in which Rabbi Eliezer is thrown out of the Sanhedrin, this story is taught in the context of this Mishnah, because, of course, Rabbi Eliezer was humiliated by being removed from the Sanhedrin. I mean, it's very interesting. Rabbi Eliezer is, of course, famously opposed to teaching women Torah. And it's fascinating that essentially what the Sanhedrin make him do is essentially become like a woman. He has to sit at home. And he's really upset. At a certain point, he puts his head down for Tachanun. And Rabban Gamliel, the head of the Bet Din, at that point dies. When Rabbi Eliezer, the wronged Rabbi Eliezer, the humiliated Rabbi Eliezer, puts his face down in Tachanun, Rabban Gamliel dies. And his sister, Rabban Gamliel's sister, who's, by the way, the wife of Rabbi Eliezer, the final comment in the Sugya comes from Ima Shalom, the sister of Rabban Gamliel, and she says, Kach Mukublani mi beit avi abba. This I have received from the house of my father's father. Yeah, she's from the house of Rabban Shimon, Rabban Shimon and Rabban Gamliel. Kol hasharim ninalem. All the gates, that is the gates of heaven, are locked. The gates of prayer are locked, or they could be locked. Chutz misharei ona'ah, except for the gates of gouging. In other words, the gates of distress that is uttered by someone who is kind of gouged or humiliated. This is just on a par with bloodshed. And the Rambam is going to explain this at more length in his commentary. I mean, he's going to use the verse, by the way, "Velo tonu ishit amito." Don't wrong one another. The same verb, tonu. Lo tonu ishit amitecha. Why? Ve'yareta melohecha. You shall fear your God. You shall fear your God. And let's see what he does with this. Know that ona'at dvarim, that means verbal gouging or verbal abuse, has got its own specific verse, namely the verse we've seen. Don't wrong one another, but fear your God. There's an element of fear here in the way that the prohibition is articulated in Vayikra, in Leviticus. And the Rambam explains that the Torah treats this offense more severely than monetary price gouging. And he says you can see this from the warning about it and the fear of it. Ve'yareta melohecha. You should be afraid of your God. If you think about insulting someone, it's more severe than just ripping them off on price. Ve'od, and more, and also people can play tricks with it. So, for example, he can stand by an item for sale and say he wants to buy it, and then not buy it, saying, I never intended to purchase it. This is the example in our Mishnah. But you'll see the Rambam goes further. Or he can ask someone who's not knowledgeable. He can ask someone who's not knowledgeable in a particular discipline to explain something in order to embarrass him. To embarrass him and then say, oh, I thought he was wise. I thought he was a wise guy. Or he can tell a story that contains disgrace or shame about his fellow. Now we're going back to our Mishnah, and then claim, oh, I didn't mean what I said. And so the Rambam goes on, about such cases, the verse says, you shall fear your God, because God knows your true intention and what you thought in your heart. You can excuse yourself maybe verbally, but he knows what you really thought. And then he closes. And of course, we've talked before about the idea that these halachot, these laws about money are sort of interspersed with ethical teachings. There's more to life than just money. And the Rambam really puts his finger on. He really puts his finger because he says, um, "V'chein timtza b'Torah b'chol makom." Thus, you will find in the Torah, in any place, v'yareta, any place that the expression "you shall fear" appears. This concerns something that human judges cannot judge. There is stuff, there is behavior that human judges can't judge. Money is easy to judge, right? But there are other types of behavior which is difficult. But just because a human judge can't judge doesn't mean that the heavenly judge is not going to judge. And whenever we see in Torah, ve'areta, you shall fear, it refers to this kind of ethical issue that a human can't judge, but we just need to keep in mind that God will judge.